My son threw those hurtful words at me, declaring that being overweight was a disgrace, and contemptuously telling me to get lost like a pig. As the father of my grandchild, his audacity left me questioning how someone could utter such callous remarks to their own child. My grandchild, visibly affected but silent, looked down without responding. Although his face was hidden, I couldn't ignore the impact of those words on him. Stepping forward, I instinctively moved to shield my grandchild from the verbal assault. With determination, I announced that I would take him away, leaving the smirking couple behind as I walked away, holding my grandchild's hand. A month later, after discovering the true nature of my grandchild, the arrogant couple appeared, suggesting we go back together. My grandchild, puzzled for a moment, scoffed at them, asking, "Who are you guys?" and turned away. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Hannah Harrison, turning 81 this year. Back in my time, I was one of the rare cases of marrying for love, a decision opposed by our relatives. We eloped, navigating life together in a place where nobody knew us. Despite the challenges, we were blessed with a child. As our family grew, we faced the joy of raising our son and later welcoming a grandchild. As the years passed, our son brought home a girlfriend, and they married. A boy was born, and despite their initial reservations, they decided to go through with the pregnancy. I convinced them to raise their child, and my grandchild grew up well under my care. However, it became apparent that the couple had no interest in parenting. They neglected their child, prompting my frequent interventions. I scolded them, but it seemed to have no effect. One day, I found my grandchild caught in the middle of a heated argument between my son and his wife, both blaming each other for their family's mess. My grandchild, now 22, hadn't pursued higher education or taken significant steps since high school. Stubbornly staying at home, he seemed to be waiting silently for his parents' arguments to end. Their criticism of his unemployment, coupled with mocking remarks about his body shape, became unbearable. Unable to endure their exchange any longer, I intervened. Stepping between my son and his wife, I asserted, "Enough, both of you. How about going shopping with Grandma John?" Despite my attempt to offer a lifeline, my grandchild mumbled a soft reply and quickly fled to his room, seemingly escaping such a tense atmosphere. My daughter-in-law, snorting in response, muttered about our ungrateful son as she watched him retreat. Then, as if their earlier argument had been a facade, the couple mentioned having errands and promptly left. I took it upon myself to tidy up the untidy house. From a young age, my grandchild had not received much care, becoming increasingly reclusive due to constant sarcastic remarks from his parents. Concerned about his well-being, I occasionally visited to do some housekeeping and secretly look after him. While vacuuming near my grandchild's room, I knocked on the door multiple times. "John, haven't you had lunch yet?" "I made some. Would you like some?" Knowing his tendency to avoid leaving his room, especially when his parents were home, I hoped to entice him with a homemade lunch, something more nutritious than his usual fast food. After a brief pause, the door cracked open, and my grandchild peeked out. "I'll eat here, Grandma. Eat with me." With a satisfying snap, the door closed. I put away the vacuum cleaner with a content feeling and started preparing lunch. When I knocked on my grandson's room again, lunch in hand, the door promptly opened, and I was invited in. The room had a faint scent of grease, but it didn't bother me. I spread out the lunch on a small table without a care, and my grandson's face lit up as he watched. It warmed my heart to see expressions he only showed to me. As we finished lunch and chatted about trivial things, it seemed my son had returned home, making the entrance noisy. My grandson immediately lost his smile, becoming silent. It appeared our pleasant time was over when my son admonished, "Hey, Mom, don't leave trash at the entrance." My son's loud yell echoed through the door as he complained about the things I left behind, despite their own negligence in properly taking out the trash. Feeling sorry for my grandson, I decided it was time to head home. Even as I waved back and left the room, my son's yelling persisted. I shouted back for him to be quiet, and as I got ready to leave, my son continued his complaints. "You should take better care of your son, John. He's your child, after all," I remarked, Shut up. If he was a girl, I would. What's wrong with having a boy? Can't dress him in cute clothes and show him off? Really, what kind of reasoning is that? I spat out my retort, grabbed the trash bag, and left my son and daughter-in-law's house. Walking away and glancing back, I saw my grandson watching me from a second-floor window. He noticed me, waved again, and I reciprocated before heading home. It had been a while since my last visit due to a busy schedule, but I decided to go to my son's house again. As I approached the entrance, I could hear my son and his wife arguing, the noise carrying outside. Sighing, I opened the door and the yelling intensified. You know, keeping your hair long and covering your face doesn't change the fact that you're overweight. Being overweight is a disgrace. Get lost, pig. Beam is shut and who does nothing but trouble. Just get out already. When I inquired about what was going on today, my son and his wife both pointed at my grandson. He started talking back to us after all we've done raising him. He repays us with defiance. I turned to my grandson, surprised by his defiance, as he glanced at me but quickly glared back at his parents. Despite being spoken down to, he stood his ground firmly, not willing to back down. I stared at him with my mouth open, taken aback by this unexpected turn of events. You don't work, but you're always relying on our money. If you have time to spend money on your pointless hobbies, why don't you go back to school? Yeah, we're fed up with you eating into the money we earn. If you're going to continue to be a burden, then please leave. My grandson, being told to leave by his parents and having no job or place to go, probably wanted nothing more than to leave this house. However, he couldn't, and he couldn't even argue back. He just glared at them, biting his lip. You can't do it, can you? Of course, you've always relied on her money. Frustration welled up in my grandson, clenching his fists. He looked like he was on the verge of exploding with anger. Then I declared, John will be living with me. My statement brought silence. My son and his wife stopped yelling, and my grandson stared at me in shock. Addressing all three of them, I said, I can't believe you tell your own child to leave. I wanted to do this sooner but didn't interfere, thinking it was better for him to be with his family. I couldn't bear to witness my dear grandson being mistreated any longer. Without hesitation, I announced, if he has nowhere to go, he can come to my house. John, pack your bags and come with me. My grandson seemingly snapped out of his shock, swiftly ran to his room. Surprised by this unexpected turn, my son and his wife, though happy to be rid of the problem, didn't intervene. Instead, they smirked. After a while, my grandson emerged with his bags packed. Ignoring the sneers from my son and daughter-in-law, I left the house with my grandson following closely behind. So began our journey of living together. Silent during the ride to my house, my grandson held onto the lunch I had given him, following me closely. Upon arrival, he left his luggage somewhat aside and entered the living room, holding only the lunch. From now on, he would be living in the house I currently inhabited alone. John must have lunch for now, I called out while preparing dishes in the kitchen. My grandson, who had been aimlessly looking around the living room, nodded slightly and began laying out the lunch on the kitchen table. After everything was ready, we put our hands together and said grace before eating. My grandson followed suit, and we finished our meal without much conversation. As I began cleaning up, my grandson seemed unsure whether to help. Gently declining his offer, I said, John, I'll give you any room you like on the second floor. Go see which one you'd prefer. Rarely coming out of his shell since childhood, exploring our house must have felt like a new experience for him. After finishing the cleaning, I sat down to drink coffee, hearing him exploring the second floor. After a while, he came down the stairs and peeked through the living room door with a small smile. Grandma, I like the corner room. I smiled and nodded, allowing him to use it however he liked. The room was once my husband's study, now empty but still holding a large desk and bookshelves. Pleased that my grandson liked the same room, he began unpacking his belongings right away. Wanting him to enjoy his free time, I decided to relax in the living room as it got dark outside. While preparing dinner, I thought about getting his new sleeping area ready and went upstairs to call him when dinner was ready. John, dinner's ready. Come on down. My grandson, deeply engrossed in drawing, forgot to turn on the light in his room, leaving the canvas in the dark. In the center of the room, a large Gerber daisy was illuminated by a streetlight. Even without the bias of him being my grandson, it was a captivating sight. My grandson started to make an effort, as if reaching for something he had never had before. Now, with what face had my son and his wife come here? Still smirking as usual, they finally broached the inevitable topic. You must be tired of living here by now. You can come back to us if you want. We thought you want to live as a family of 3 again, so we came to pick you up. We'll buy you all the art supplies you need. You don't have to stay here anymore. Let's go back together, shall we? Did they really think he would accept their offer after ridiculing his interests, treating him poorly just because he wasn't the daughter they wanted? Despite the awful things they had said and essentially kicking him out, now that he had found success away from them, they decided it was time to welcome him back. The audacity boiled my blood. My grandson, likely feeling the same, clenched his fists, glaring at them the entire time. Just as I began to worry it might turn into a physical altercation, he relaxed his shoulders, unclenched his fists, crossed his arms, and scoffed at them. Who are you guys? We were all taken aback by his response. My son and his wife looked at each other. After kicking me out just because I wasn't a girl, and now you come back just because I appeared on TV? Really shows what kind of people you are, my grandson continued, mimicking my son and his wife's insensitive laughter. He let loose, giving them a piece of his mind, having been subjected to their sarcasm since he could remember. He didn't stop until he had said everything he could think of, then heaved a big sigh. That's the deal. I'm not going back, and I don't want to. As my grandson made his stance clear, my son and his wife, their faces turning red with anger, were about to explode when a familiar voice intervened. I'd like to hear more about this story. Turning around, they saw the man who had helped with my grandson's exhibition, followed by reporters scheduled for today's magazine interview. They all pointed their voice records our way, having recorded the entire exchange. Seeing the reporters' involvement, my son and his wife tried to flee with their faces contorted. However, the reporters and neighbors who had crowded the entrance wouldn't let them, and in the end, they couldn't escape. They were forced to watch as we proceeded with the interviews. A few days later, the incident made the news and was featured in a magazine article of considerable size. We arranged for a lawyer, and a restraining order was issued against my son and his wife. They've been troubled by daily reprimands over the phone and cold looks from the neighbors. Now they can no longer approach my grandson. It's their punishment for trying to manipulate him for their own convenience. My grandson has continued his art and diet as if nothing had happened. It seems like lifting the emotional burden has inspired him to face everything more positively. As for me, I've received several paintings from my grandson since then and even gave an interview about discovering his talent. Now, I'm leisurely sipping coffee while watching a documentary featuring my grandson. Occasionally, I can't help but smile as I gaze at the Gerber painting in the living room, which stands out among the rest. The man asked me to sell him the painting, but that's one request I cannot fulfill. It's a precious treasure my grandson gave me for the first time. It was truly a beautiful painting. The room now carried a stronger scent of oil paint than it ever did back at my son and his wife's place. John had a hobby of oil painting. "Grandma, this is for you," he said, presenting a canvas featuring a large orange Gerber daisy against a backdrop of a clear blue sky with thin clouds. Yet it wasn't just that. The corners were tinged with the colors of sunset, giving the impression that evening was approaching. It was a wonderfully crafted painting. While I knew of my grandson's hobby, I had never seen his work before. I was surprised by his talent upon this first encounter. The man nodded in agreement, and I welcomed him into our home. A month after that incident, my grandson was preparing for his own art exhibition. It turned out that the man who approached us in the yard owned an art gallery and had become interested after seeing me admiring my grandson's paintings. Intrigued by the joy with which I gazed at the walls adorned with numerous paintings, he expressed a desire to learn more about the art. Before we knew it, arrangements were made, and today, my grandson's exhibition was finally opening. The man even reached out to television stations, and a local news program came to cover the event. My grandson, although very shy with all the attention, seemed pleased to be praised by so many people. The exhibition was a huge success, boosting my grandson's confidence and inspiring him to create even more paintings. I thought we were set for a smooth sail from here on, but then an unexpected visitor showed up. Someone visited our house, and thinking it was about time for a visit, I went to answer the door without checking who it was. To my surprise, my son and his wife stood there smirking down at me. Feeling nothing but disgust towards them, I was speechless. "Mom, it's been a while. We thought it might be getting tough for you to take care of John, so we've come to take him back. Sorry for the trouble. He can be quite a handful, can't he?" Their insincere tone was evident, and I stood there dumbfounded. My grandson, who had been working on his art late into the night, yawned as he headed towards the living room upon hearing the commotion. "Grandma, is it that time already?" he asked. To spike his tiredness, he quickly walked towards me, positioning himself between us and his parents. Seeing this, my son and his wife looked surprised. "John, have you lost weight?" My son commented. "Not dramatically, but yeah, you've slimmed down." Indeed, my grandson had lost some weight since moving in with me. The poor diet and unhealthy lifestyle he had led to weight gain, but since living with me and focusing on his art, he stopped snacking and ate balanced meals. He gradually became healthier, and though he tried to hide it, I knew he sneaked out to run in the middle of the night since leaving his parents' house. "You don't want it, right?" my grandson asked, noticing my silence. He slumped his shoulders as he stood up. "It's a bit smelly from the paint. I'll open the window to ventilate, so you go ahead downstairs." "Are you sure I can have such a wonderful painting?" I approached the artwork and looked at it intently. Unable to contain my emotions, I couldn't help but cry. Embracing my flustered grandson, I thanked him repeatedly. The painting quickly became my favorite, hanging proudly in the living room. Every day I admired it, initially making John embarrassed and shy. However, with my continuous praise, he gradually started to smile happily. He confessed that he had never been praised before, and my enthusiastic compliments seemed to inspire him to create more. Each finished piece received praise and a spot in our living room gallery. One day, as I was sipping coffee in the living room and admiring the paintings, a voice came from the garden. "You have a lovely home. Do you like paintings?" Turning towards the voice, I noticed a man who seemed interested in John's artwork. "I don't know about paintings in general, but I love my grandson's paintings. All of these were done by him," I replied, thrilled that someone was interested. I hurried outside to chat with the man. Most of what I said turned into bragging, but he listened intently, nodding along. We talked for quite a while. Eventually, my grandson, who had gone out to buy art supplies, returned and had to interrupt our conversation. Pleased with the man's interest, I introduced my grandson to him and invited him to join us for dinner, if he'd like. Despite his shyness, my grandson looked a bit reluctant but agreed.